When the Spanish conquistadors claimed areas of Central America and Mexico in the 16th century, they discovered the ruins of a great civilization, that of the Mayans, who had vanished and left evidence of their lost grandeur in massive structures that had been overwhelmed by the surrounding rainforest. The native people could not explain the significance of the sprawling, vacant cities to the conquistadors. Unlike the great Incan cities, the Mayan centers had long been abandoned. The ruins of the Mayans did not begin to reveal their secrets for 300 years. Since the 19th century, enough information has been gathered about the Mayan structures to sketch a history of their development, but the reasons why the great structures were suddenly abandoned and the exact purposes of their massive and elaborate buildings continue to remain trapped in the past. The Mayan structure at its pinnacle stretched from central Mexico to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. There are 14 commonly recognized major Mayan archaeological ruin sites in the Yucatan. Tulum and Coba are the most visited sites in Quintana Roo. The most famous Mayan ruin site is Chichen Itza, located in the Mexican state of Yucatan and characterizes a typical Mayan center with plazas, pyramid, a court for ball games, and blocks of stone inscribed with hieroglyphics. Tikal, another Mayan center in Guatemala, had more than 3,000 structures in a 6-square-mile area and accommodated a surrounding community that may have numbered as many as 90,000 people. The magnificent structures at Tikal in Guatemala and Calakmul in the Mexican state of Campeche have been declared World Heritage Sites by UNESCO. The various ruins were not excavated and examined until the latter half of the 19th century. They show that Mayans developed systems of mathematics, writing, and astronomy and erected monumental forms of architecture. Subsequent discoveries showed their calendar recorded dates as far back as 600 before the present era. The Maya used a base 20 and base 5 numbering system and developed the concept of zero by 36 BC. There were 3 symbols that formed the numerals: a shell glyph, meaning 0, a dot, meaning 1, and a bar, meaning 5. By the 1st century BCE, they specifically used a calendar that had 18 20-day months. Matching the Mayan base 20 mathematical system, the contemporary mathematical system used in the West is base 10. The Spanish church and government officials destroyed Maya texts, and with them the knowledge of Maya writing. Although many Mayan centers went into decline or were completely abandoned, the skill and knowledge of Maya writing persisted among segments of the population, and the early Spanish conquistadors knew of individuals who could still read and write the script. Unfortunately, the Spanish displayed little interest in it, and as a result, the dire impacts the conquest had on Maya societies, the knowledge was subsequently lost, probably within only a few generations. The decipherment and recovery of now lost knowledge of Maya writing has been long and a laborious process. Some elements were first deciphered in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, mostly the parts having to do with numbers, the Maya calendar, and astronomy. By the end of the 20th century, scholars were able to read the majority of Maya texts, to a large extent, and recent fieldwork continues to further illuminate the content. When modern archaeologists learned how to read Mayan hieroglyphics, a history emerged that showed the Mayan centers were not occupied by peaceful astronomers, and the large structures did not serve specifically as ceremonial sites. Instead, the hieroglyphics boasted of the accomplishments of a warlike elite. Many of the great Mayan buildings were monuments to great military leaders. Settlements with large structures served as centers for trade, but primarily for the accumulation of riches for the elite of Mayan society. Those who contributed to culture, artisans and astronomers among them, were highly esteemed, but a ruling elite held the riches and the power. The Maya reached their peak between AD 200 and AD 900, when they declined for reasons unknown. Many of the major sites were abandoned, others lasted until the 17th century. Many of the ruins were rediscovered during the 19th century, when logging brought the ancient centers to light. Almost all of the ancient sites had been covered and hidden by dense jungle overgrowth. Among the Maya, social hierarchy played an important role, and nobility enjoyed special privileges and exercised absolute power. Some of the Mayan ruins still have preserved inscriptions and paintings. The nobles were warriors and glorified for their victories. Mayan art required a wide range of specialized craftsmen to make paintings, carved stone, and stucco sculptures. Dances were an important part of religious events. Musicians played the drums, wooden and clay trumpets and flutes, rattles and scrapers. Mayan art is impressive not only because of its size, but also because of its harmonious composition. The common people and slaves were responsible for providing material goods. Under the supervision of priests, activities such as slash and burn agriculture, hunting, and building were carried out collectively. Most of the goods obtained by the lower classes were handed over as tribute to the noble classes, comprised of lords and priests. The lord class practiced cranial deformation and perforated nasal septum, lips, and earlobes to insert nose rings, lower lip, and ear rings. They filed their teeth and inlaid them with obsidian, jade, and pyrite stones. The Maya tattooed their skin and painted their bodies for ritual or war. Mayan buildings were erected around large open squares where the people participated in religious ceremonies. Construction and the use of blocks of limestone were covered with a layer of stucco which served as the base for painting and buildings with different colors. The buildings were decorated with sculptures modeled in stucco or carved in stone, on which they depicted their rulers ascending to power. They also portrayed the works commissioned during the Lord's rule, alternating them with mythical beings. The high temperatures of the Yucatan made it difficult to work with lime. Mayan painters incorporated vegetable gum into their blends of lime and coloring. The mixture was applied to murals with feathered brushes. The Maya utilized dry fresco, which consists of applying a flat layer of lime mixed with a little sand to the base stone. The layer was then polished. Scenes were then etched in red. They made colors from a variety of sources, including minerals from distant lands. Reds and browns were extracted from seeds, bark, and clay. Purple and magenta were extracted from sea snail and insects. Maya gods represented the forces of nature. The same god could be beneficial or harmful, male or female, and provide energy for life or death. The ancient Maya represented the universe with an enormous silk cotton tree. The branches supported the heavens, or Kan. Man's life on earth, or Kab, took place within the trunk, and the roots sank into the underworld, or Xibalba. They believed the earth was square, and thought it was supported by an enormous alligator or turtle. Heaven was divided into 13 levels ruled by the same number of gods, while the underworld was divided into 9 levels. Mayan civilization thrived until 800, when a decline began. Tikal was abandoned, and the process of recording events stopped there by 900. Uxmal showed more development around 850, but it was abandoned around 925. Chichen Itza was abandoned around 987. It was subsequently occupied like some of the other centers, but new massive structures were not built, and the old temples did not serve the same functions as they had in the past. What factors caused the demise of the Mayan Empire remains a mystery. Destruction from earthquakes is evident in some Mayan centers, but not all, and earthquakes are not believed to have leveled any of the major centers. There is no evidence of mass burials that would indicate an epidemic such as plague, smallpox, or other infectious diseases that swept through Europe during the same time as the Mayans' golden era and downfall. The great success of the Mayan culture may be a plausible reason for their downfall. As the population grew, the stress on agriculture became greater. For an expanding population, requires consistently more food production. Soil erosion, or drought, would have greatly affected the large settlements, but no conclusive evidence has been found to determine a sudden, widespread catastrophe. Whatever happened to the Mayans was an event of such magnitude that it caused a fracture in the long-standing practices and social order of the entire culture. The great cities continued to be occupied for decades after the hieroglyphics stopped reporting triumphs. And then the majestic temples, stately pyramids, and massive edifices were abandoned completely to the surrounding jungle. There is evidence that the Maya population exceeded the carrying capacity of the environment, including exhaustion of agricultural potential and overhunting of megafauna. Some scholars have recently theorized that an intense 200-year drought led to the collapse of Maya civilization. Newer research from 2011, with use of high-resolution climate models and new reconstructions of past landscapes, suggests that converting much of their forest land into cropland may have led to reduced evotranspiration and thus rainfall, magnifying natural drought. A study published in Science in 2012 found that modest rainfall reductions amounting to only 25 to 40% in annual rainfall may have been the tipping point to the Maya collapse. Based on samples of lake and cave sediments in the areas surrounding major Maya cities, the researchers were able to determine the amount of annual rainfall in the region. The mild droughts that took place between AD 800 and 950 were enough to rapidly reduce open water availability. A further paper in the same journal supports and extends this conclusion based on isotope analysis of minerals and a stalagmite. It argues that high rainfall between 440 and 660 CE allowed the Maya to flourish in their first instance, and that while mild droughts in the following years led to extensive warfare and the decline of Mayan civilization, it was a prolonged period of drought between 1020 and 1100 CE that was ultimately fatal. Tulum was a walled city serving as a major port for Coba and is one of the best preserved Mayan sites and a major tourist attraction. The two sites are situated along the east coast of the Yucatan Peninsula on the Caribbean Sea in the state of Quintana Roo, Mexico. Tulum was one of the last cities inhabited and built by the Mayans. It was at its height between the 13th and 15th centuries and managed to survive about 70 years after the Spanish began occupying Mexico. Old world diseases brought by the Spanish settlers appear to have been the cause of its demise. One of the best preserved coastal Maya sites, Tulum is today a popular site for tourists. Tulum was known by its Mayan name, Zama, meaning City of Dawn, because it faces the sunrise. Tulum stands on a bluff facing east toward the Caribbean Sea. Tulum is also the Yucatan Mayan word for fence, wall, or trench, and the walls surrounding the site allowed the Tulum fort to be defended against invasions. Tulum had access to both land and sea trade routes, making it an important trade hub, especially for obsidian. From numerous depictions in murals and other works around the site, Tulum appears to have been an important site for the worship of the diving or descending god. Tulum had an estimated population of 1,000 to 1,600 inhabitants. It has been determined that Tulum was occupied during the late post-classic period around AD 1200. The site continued to be occupied until contact with the Spanish was made in the early 16th century. By the end of the 16th century, the site was abandoned completely. Tulum was protected on one side by steep sea cliffs and on the landward side by a wall that averaged about 3 to 5 meters in height. The wall was also about 8 meters thick and 400 meters long on the side parallel to the sea. Constructing this massive wall would have taken an enormous amount of energy and time, which shows how important defense was to the Maya when they chose this site. Near the northern side of the wall, a small cenote provided the city with fresh water. It is this impressive wall that makes Tulum one of the most well-known fortified sites of the Maya. A small shrine appears to have been used as a beacon for incoming canoes. This shrine marks a break in the barrier reef that is opposite the site. Here, there is a cove and landing beach and a break in the sea cliffs that would have been perfect for trading canoes coming in. This characteristic of the site may be one of the reasons the Maya founded the city of Tulum exactly here, as Tulum later became a prominent trading port during the late Post-Classic. Both coastal and land routes converged at Tulum, which is apparent by the number of artifacts found in or near the site that show contacts with areas all over central Mexico and Central America. Copper artifacts from the Mexican highlands have been found near the site, as have flint artifacts, ceramics, incense burners, and gold objects from all over the Yucatan. Salt and textiles were among some of the goods brought to Tulum by sea that would have been then dispersed inland. Typical exported goods included feathers and copper objects that came from inland sources. The Tulum archaeological site is relatively compact compared with many other Maya sites in the vicinity, and is one of the best preserved coastal Maya sites. Its proximity to the modern tourism development along the Mexican Caribbean coastline and its short distance from Cancun and the surrounding Riviera Maya has made it a popular Maya tourist site in the Yucatan. Daily tour buses bring a constant stream of visitors to the site. The Tulum ruins are the third most visited archaeological site in Mexico, after Teotihuacan and Chichen Itza. A large number of cenotes and cave systems are located in the Tulum area.